Hello everyone, my name is Marcus Leach and this is the latest in the Summer of Taste recipe series. Now this week's recipe is a Turkish meatball stew. Now our love for meatballs started way back when we were traveling in Italy and it's something we've enjoyed ever since. And it's something we actually found a little bit by surprise here in Turkey whilst eating at a very local restaurant a couple of weeks ago, and they were cooked in this really nice mildly spiced sauce, and it's something I've experimented a little bit with since and I've come up with this recipe. So without further ado, let's have a quick look at our equipment. As always, it's the CADAC Carri Chef 2, and no surprises, my favorite top to that, it's the paella pan. Such a versatile dish, and the reason I'm using that this week is because there's two phases to this recipe in terms of the cooking, and it enables you to maintain and keep all of the flavor from cooking the meatballs a little bit first. So that's what we're cooking on. Let's take a quick look at our ingredients, and then I'm going to show you how to make this delicious dish. The first stage of this recipe is to make the meatballs. Now, I believe when it comes to making meatballs, much like if you're making a homemade burger, you should keep things really simple. I think some people try and put too many different components in on top of the good quality ground beef mince. So all I've got is a little bit of salt and pepper to season it. So I'm just going to sort of bring this all together and make the meatballs. When you're making your meatballs, don't be afraid to get your hands into the meat, really sort of mix it in, make sure the seasoning's all mixed through nicely. I mean, it's almost like it's sort of squelching through your fingers. And then I'm just taking a fairly decent chunk into the palms of my hands and I'm rolling it with my hands slightly cupped so it sort of just keeps rolling round on itself until it's formed quite a nice sort of chunky meatball. Had the paella pan on a high heat for a couple of minutes now to get that sort of up to sort of the high temperature. And I want to cook them on a high temperature because I want to seal the outsides of the meatballs before taking them off, cooking the sauce, and then finishing the meatballs back in the sauce. And the reason I'm doing it all in the paella pan is it just keeps all the flavors in there. So you don't lose anything if you're cooking the meatballs on the plancha plate. So we're just going to pop these in now. On goes the lid, give them a couple of minutes, and then I'm going to turn them and cook them on the other side. So they're browned on both sides now, so I'm going to take them off and pop them onto a plate, and then we're going to get on with the sauce. Into the same pan, which has got all that flavour from the meat just cooking in there, we're going to add one chopped onion, and I've got 3 cloves of garlic crushed. With the onions having softened nicely, I'm going to add in the next lot of ingredients. And I've got 5 large ripe tomatoes diced up, and I've got 2 sweet red peppers diced up. So in we go with these. It's going to be back on with the lid now, and I'm going to leave that to simmer for about 7 or 8 minutes before we come back and check on it. As you can see, the tomatoes and the peppers have really had a chance to soften and start to cook. So we're ready to move on to the next stage now. And I've got 3 main parts to do here. Now, the first is to add in the tomato paste, which is a little bit like tomato puree, if you will, and it's something you see all over here in the shop. So I'm going to be quite generous with this. And I've got 3 large spoonfuls of that. Time for our all-important herbs and spices. Now in this little dish, I've got 2 teaspoons of dried thyme. I've got a teaspoon of smoked paprika, got a teaspoon of dried garlic, and then I've also got a large teaspoon of port biber, which is this red pepper flake, and it's got a little bit of heat to it, but not too much, but it's more of a sort of flavor that comes through. So I'm going to add those in. Last component to the sauce at the moment is our stock, and I've got 400 ml of vegetable stock here, which I'm just gonna add over the top. Everything's mixed in really nicely on that sauce, so I'm going to put the meatballs back in, reduce the heat, and then we're just going to cover it back up, give it 10 to 12 minutes, and then dinner should be ready. Even before taking the lid off, I can already smell it's absolutely delicious, and I'm pretty certain it's almost ready. So let's have a quick look. They look delicious. They smell delicious, and there's only one more thing to do, and that's to go and eat them and make sure that they taste delicious. But just before I do, I'm going to add in the very final ingredient, and that is the chopped parsley. So I'm just going to add that over the top. Adds a nice burst of color, but also a little bit of extra flavor once you mix it in. Very well with pasta, also goes well with rice. But here in Turkey, where we are near some fantastic local bakeries, we've been enjoying the bread, and it's a really great way to make sure you can mop up all of the sauce and make sure that nothing goes to waste. Whatever it is that you choose to serve this with, I hope you enjoy it, and I'll see you next week for another recipe.